All right, good morning. So I haven't taught in about 3 months, so that's been a little while since I've been able to teach. I was excited about it. I really missed teaching, so I'm very happy to get to teach again this morning. There wasn't really necessarily intentional to begin with. At the first of the year, right after we got into January and got right in there, we had a lot of guest speakers that were coming to us, and we were allowing them to take the class slots and speak then, so I lost some slots there. And didn't teach then, so I thought that'd be okay. I'll pick it up after that slows down a little bit. And then all the stuff happened with my dad and storm damage and all that at his house and him going into the facility. And we started working on that. So I talked with Don and told him, I said, I need a break for a little bit because I don't like to just throw things together. I worry a lot about trying to teach truth and be accurate, and I study things to death to try to get it as right as I can get it. I want it to be accurate as best that I can, so I don't like to throw things together. So he said, how long you need? And I said, well, I've got a goal of having the house ready, go on the market by June the 1st, and that's the last we talked about. And I thought the other day, I probably need to look to see where he's put me back in the schedule on June the 1st. So Don's really good to push you to challenge yourself in those kind of areas. So I looked at that, and I thought, I could use a little more time, but I thought, you know what, I could probably pull this off. So it's a good thing to be challenged. So what we're going to talk about this morning, I hope, is something that's going to probably resonate with you. It's something that I see to be a very prevalent thing in our society nowadays. And I'm going to start out with telling you two different stories. And I'm going to just hit the high points on the two different stories, but they're very, very similar, only the two different stories have a very different outcome. And it's to do with me personally, with things that I've experienced myself. And you'll think about these stories as I tell them, and you probably have experiences in your life that are very similar. Right around late 2020, I had a workshop built at my house. Been wanting one a long time, and I talked to some guys, and I picked one. I chose a guy to build the workshop. And whenever he came and he started the shop, he was kind of slow at it. He was working back and forth, but I didn't really care about that. I just wanted it done well. I had drawings that I give him, so I gave him the drawings, and I gave him the outline of what I expected and what I wanted. And all that was going really well. And one of the specific things that I said on the drawing was it had a black wainscoting on the front of it. It's a metal post frame building. It's a dark gray building with black trim. And it had a black wainscot on the front. And whenever they build those metal buildings, they run them all the way around the building, pretty much the same plane at the bottom, but I wanted the front picked up 4 inches because I didn't want to lose part of the height of the wainscoting. And I was very specific about that, and I told him about that, and it was in the drawings, and it was in the discussion, and we were supposed to do that. Well, me being a contractor for a living, whenever something gets done incorrectly, unless it's something that can't be fixed very easily, I'm not very excited about it. And I came home from work one day, and I pulled in. As soon as I pulled down the driveway, the wainscoting was at the same height as the rest of it. So no big deal. I'll let him know. So I gave him a call. They were already gone, and he had left his guys there working, didn't stay with them. Something we need to look at on the front of the building. You need to come by and look at it. So he said, sure. So he shows up, and he comes down the driveway, and we walk out, and I told him, pointed out that the wainscoting was at the wrong height, and we were going to need to pick it up. And out of nowhere, he goes into this rant, and he's standing in pretty close proximity to me, and he goes into this rant about, I knew I shouldn't have worked for you. All you contractors are the same. You think you know everything. And he just really started into all this, and I'm like, okay. So I'm just kind of standing there real relaxed like I am now with my hands in my pockets, and he's like tearing it up. He ain't happy. And I'm thinking, okay. So he goes into this rant, and finally when he stops, I said, are you done? And he's just standing there looking at me, and I said, you got two choices. Either fix the building or go ahead and finish it like it is, and I'll pay you, and you can leave, and then I'll take it apart and fix it. I mean, there ain't no other thing to talk about. I mean, that's what we got to do. I got to have it raised up, and there's a reason I asked for that. He stood there and looked at me for a minute, and I thought there for a second he was going to take a swing at me, so I took my hands out of my pocket because I thought, this might go different, I think. He turned around and walked off, got in his truck, and left. And I thought, okay. So I'm standing there looking at the building, looking at what needs to be finished and what I should probably pay him if he don't come back. And then I hear something, I turn around, and he's pulling back in the driveway. And he comes down the driveway, and I thought, round two, I don't know what's about to happen here. So I'm sitting there waiting on him, and he gets out of the truck, and he comes walking over to me, and he stands there a minute, and he said, I don't know what to do with you. And I said, I don't know what that means. And he said, the way I just talked to you, and as close as I was to you, talking to you like that, he said, I expected you to hit me in the mouth, and you didn't. And I said, did you want me to? And he said, kinda. And, and I'm like, I don't understand. And he stood there a minute, and he said, I've never had that experience. He said, I've had the experience before where I got hit in the mouth. And he said, we've had struggles and arguments and fusses. And He said, but you just stood there. And he said, nothing changed. Your face didn't change. Your whole demeanor didn't change. And you told me 2 options. And he said, I don't know what to do with that. So I just got in the car and left. And he said, and I was driving away and I was thinking, I got to do something different. So he said, I came back and he said, well, in the middle of all of his ranting, he told me that he would fix the building, but it was going to cost me $2,000. And I told him, when I told him that he could either fix it like it was and finish it and I'd pay him, or he could, I would fix it myself, or he would fix the building, but I wasn't going to pay him $2,000. But anyway, he said, I'll call the metal supply tomorrow and have them cut new metal. And he said, and I'll change it out and I won't charge you anything. He said, I feel like an idiot. And I said, it's okay. I said, it's a mistake. We'll fix it. So, and he did a great job. Second story, really different outcome. So this is pretty recent, just a little while ago. And what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is rude and aggressive behavior and how should we respond? What should our response be? The second one shook me a little bit, and it's not been that long ago. And oddly enough, on the Wednesday night that we were studying this very topic, the Thursday morning after that's when I had this experience. And I actually called Don and told him about it because it bothered me quite a bit, and we talked a little bit about it. So I bought and I won't tell the story. I won't tell the store that it is, or I won't tell details about that, and just the high points again. I bought a bush hog for my skid steer, and whenever I took it to the farm to use it the first time, I felt a vibration in it that didn't seem to like it should be there. And I've used a bush hog a lot. We've rented them for years, and I finally wanted on one, so I bought one. A little bit of a vibration. I had a concern, so I called back over to the store and said, I feel a vibration. I'd like to have it looked at. No complaint. I just need to know if it's in spec. I don't want it to wear prematurely. Okay, fine. Bring it in. Let me know one day in advance. Well, when the day came that I knew I could take it, I let him know 2 days in advance. And then I took it to the store, and I told him I'd be there a little after they opened at 8 o'clock. So I did that. And I got there that morning. They were unloading trucks, very busy. And I walked up, and he said, you were supposed to be here yesterday. And I'm like, today's Thursday, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, no, I said Thursday, but that's okay. And he said, we can't look at it for a while. And I said, that's okay. So I unloaded the machine, parked it outside, out of the way, and then I went in wandering around looking at tractors and mowers and different things. And, an hour goes by, and nothing really any different. I'm still not excited. I had time set aside for this, okay, so it's not a big deal. The owner of the store was the one I was dealing with, and I hadn't dealt with him before. We've been doing business there, my dad and I, about right at 10 years. Long time, but it always been the parts counter and that kind of thing. This is a short story, I promise, because we need to get to our lesson. So we were into it about an hour and a half, and then the girl at the counter says, they've got one more truck. If you hadn't had anything to eat, maybe you go get a biscuit or something. I said, yeah, I'll run up here and do that. So the owner had already talked to me a couple of times, and he had asked me if I was just going to leave it. And I said, no, I'm not going to leave it. The whole time, and this is very important to the story, when I called him on the phone and told him what I do, when I got there, told him what I do, all the while I always said that I'll stay here with it. They don't service these skid steers. The skid steer has nothing to do with it. It was the implement I wanted them to look at. I said, I'm going to stay here with it. I'll run it for you, let you look at it, and then we'll go from there, and you may have to put it on one of your machines and run it and see what it does. So that was the understanding. Never anything different from that. We never talked about anything different from that. So whenever she said, go get a biscuit, I told him, which is sitting in an office over here, I said, I'm going to go over here and grab something to eat. I'll be back 15, 20 minutes tops, and then you guys will be maybe ready by then. Sure. So when I get back to the store, you got to remember, we're 2 hours into this, and I am not excited. I'm very calm. I come walking into the store, and then the girl at the counter said, service manager's ready to see you back there now. And I said, okay. I started to turn around, and I took one step toward the door, and I heard him yelling. And I turned around and looked, and he's looking at me. And I'm like, so I walk over toward his office, and I said, you talking to me? And he's yelling, and he's talking about, I didn't leave them a key, and they wanted to get into the machine, and they didn't have a key. And he's yelling, and I'm just standing there like, wow, I didn't understand this, trying to make sense of it. And he don't stop. And he goes on, and he goes on, and he goes on, and I'm not having a reaction to it until he started telling me that I was stupid. He was telling me that I was stupid, that I was dumb. And he said a lot of other stuff, and he said I was there on the wrong day, and I felt it. It feels hot. I don't know how it feels when you guys get mad, but I can feel it. It's a surge. It feels hot. So I felt that surge, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And I said, I'm not going to stand here and listen to you talk to me that way anymore. I said, I've stood here patiently. You won't stop. And he's talking over me. I said, I'm not going to listen to it. I said, she has got a Post-it note stuck to her computer with my name, time, and date and everything on her computer. All you got to do is look at it and know I'm here on the right day. I'm not going to listen to it anymore. And he turned in his chair like he was going to get up, and I knew at that moment I had a decision to make. Because if he would have came at me, I'd have had to decide what I was going to do, and I didn't need to be there in it. And I turned around and walked out the door. And there was more. He said more stuff. It got bad. And I walked out the door and I went to the parking lot. I thought about loading the machine and leaving and just not staying. But I decided to go to the back and see the service manager. When I did, and I got back there and I told the service manager what had happened, he said, wow, he'll call you later and apologize. Well, that call never came. We had the machine looked at and the bush hog looked at, and it's within spec, but I've got a warranty thing. If it fails, I can talk to him. So I tell these two stories to tell this. I tried to have the same reaction both times. I did much better the first time than I did the second time. He made me mad. That's the maddest I've been in a long time. That was the Thursday before we went on our camping trip recently with the family, and it kept creeping back into my mind over the weekend. And I called Don and I talked to him about it. And Don said, well, you know, that's not a bad characteristic to be able to stick up for yourself and not take that. But it caused me to think back about the class on Wednesday night and how that went and the comments that I made, and I thought I need to study this again. So I did. Here's two more things about this story. The guy building my building at the time when that happened was being sued for $75,000 for somebody else that he built the building for, and before he got my building done, he lost that, and he had to pay the $75,000. That was his problem. When I got to the back the other day to get the bush hog looked at, the service manager told me that guy had fired 2 people 3 weeks before, and everybody quit. Everybody. And there was tractors and mowers and stuff sitting around torn apart all over the place, so he had some stuff going on too. Probably why it all happened. So it's caused me to ask this question, and I've got to get along into it here for us to be able to get to the end of it. This is a one-class thing. I don't really want to carry it on a long time. Rude and aggressive behaviors, and how do we deal with them, and what should be our response? Our response, you know, it's easy to say, you know, turn the other cheek and do all that, and we're going to get into that, but what should our response be as a Christian? What does God expect to us? And it caused me to study it deeper and look at it a little more closely, because I was thinking for a little bit that because I let him make me angry that I had failed, because I told him I wasn't going to listen to him anymore before I left the store, and I don't intend on going back and getting any more of that. I won't go back to the store. And the thing I thought when I went to the parking lot that bothered me a lot is I thought my dad would be so disappointed if he knew how I'd just been treated, because we traded there for 10 years. So here's the thing. Here's where we're going to get into it. Rude and aggressive is not the same thing. Rude and aggressive behaviors are distinct behaviors, but they're related, but they're not the same. Rude behavior is unintentional, disrespect or unkindness, while aggressive behavior is more intentional. It's designed for a reason. When somebody's being aggressive with you, the aggressive behavior can be physical, or it can be yelling or insults like the guys did to me. And out of all these years, those are the two that stand out a lot to me. Rude behavior is inadvertent. It's a side effect of a person's demeanor. Rude behavior often stems from thoughtlessness. They don't think what they're saying. Some people don't think about what they're saying and how it affects you and how it makes you feel. And there's another thing to consider too. There's a lot of people in our area now that are moving in, and they're not from around here, as we say. And sometimes they can be more direct. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can catch us off guard, and we can perceive that as being rude behavior, but they don't see it that way. Examples of rude behavior, I put down 3 or 4. Give me a couple of examples of what you would consider rude behavior. I know I've been kind of plowing into this, and I threw you a curveball by asking for a comment, but what would be an example of rude behavior to you? What makes you feel like somebody's being rude with you? Yeah. Yeah, I knew there would be some road rage type stuff. That's, people get extra. I actually put cutting in line. I've had people just walk in front of me and get in line. You know, really makes me want to say something, but I try not to. You know, cutting in line, getting in your personal space. I don't like trying to check out at Lowe's and somebody's trying to stand in my back pocket like I need some space to be able to swipe the card and do the thing. And so, you know, those kind of things are rude. Retail workers, food service workers, sometimes you go in and you pay good money for a meal and act like they don't care if you're there. That's rude. But then the flip side of that is sometimes I see customers that want to be waited on like they're a king or queen. I don't know that we deserve that. We just need common respect. You know, the purpose of rudeness usually is not necessarily intended to cause harm, but it can still cause distress. It can cause people to feel unappreciated and hurt them, and it can damage relationships. Aggressive behavior is different. It being intentional. Aggressive is often characterized as a deliberate intent to harm or intimidate. Aggression can manifest in many forms: physical, verbal, relational, even cyberbullying. We have that now, where you have aggressive behavior online. That's a whole other study. The key to differences, though, is intent. It's what you're trying to accomplish. I think both of those guys that I just told the story about had some real other personal stuff going on. And then I got to thinking about the bush hog thing, and maybe he really didn't want to deal with the warranty on that bush hog. Maybe he had so much new equipment sitting around and nobody working on stuff. Maybe it was a financial thing for him. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. I don't know, but I sure got the brunt of it. To summarize the difference in the two, rude behavior is a form of disrespect, and aggression is a form of hostility, and there's definitely a difference. And understanding the differences between these behaviors is important for us in fostering positive relationships. And, I always say this: I want to leave the world a better place. We can create a more respectful environment for all of us to live in if we learn the differences in these behaviors and we learn how to handle them like we should. But in Josh's class on Wednesday night, that Wednesday night before that Thursday, we were looking at Luke 6 is where we were at. And that study wasn't intended really to be all-inclusive, and this one can't be either with the time frame that we have. And I'm not trying to redo what Josh done in that class, but we're going to look at it, I guess, from my perspective of the things that I experienced here, and hopefully get some feedback from you guys of the things that you experienced. And this is something that, like I said, it shook me. It bothered me all weekend. And that night I didn't really sleep when I got home, that Thursday night, and I thought about it a lot. And, the thing that I forgot to do about it right away was pray about it. I don't know why I did that. About 1 o'clock in the morning, I prayed real hard about it and prayed for him, and I prayed for that situation, and I felt some peace, and I got to feeling better. But it still stuck with me for a few days, and I'm okay with it now. I'm at peace with it. I know I didn't do anything wrong, but we'll go through this study here, and maybe that'll help a little bit. Typically, there's two groups of people when you talk about this. It's either the turn the other cheekers or it's the table flippers. And y'all know what I'm referring to with that. You have people that think that no matter what, you have to turn the other cheek and you have to take it. And then you have other people that think, well, if somebody comes at me, I'm back at them, no matter what it is. It's kind of the two things that people do. And finding a happy balance between the two, that's difficult, because who's right in that thinking? And is it okay to be angry? And we're going to talk about that. Life's about striking a good balance. And did you realize that God expects us to be angry sometimes? He put that emotion in us. And let's look at Mark chapter 11, verses 15 and 16. And we're going to look at some instances where Jesus himself was angry here. Mark 11, 15 and 16. Of course, this is where he went in and flipped the tables. And starting in verse 15, it says, as they came to Jerusalem, and then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those that bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables and the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. What does it not say in those verses? It says what he done, but it's not a trick question. What does it not say? Doesn't say he was angry, does it? Doesn't really say that. He just said he went into the temple and he began to drive them out. But I think it's understood that he really had to be. It's inferred that he had to be angry. Wouldn't you agree? That to be able to accomplish that task, how are you going to turn tables over and run people out? People aren't going to pay much attention to you if you're going in there and saying, hey, probably shouldn't do that. Then they're going to be like, yeah, whatever. So Jesus went about it in a way that there had to be some zeal there and some anger to some extent whenever he went in and flipped those tables. Mark 3, 1 and 5 is the next one we're going to look at. And this section of verses in Mark 3, verses 1 through 5, he was teaching in the synagogue, and he entered the synagogue there in verse 1. And a man was there who had a withered hand. So they watched him closely, and whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. So they were watching Jesus, trying to find fault in him, and so that they might accuse him. And in verse 3 it says, and he said to the man with the withered hand, step forward. And then he said to them, so he turned around and said to them, he said, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save or life or to kill? But they kept silent. They wouldn't answer him. But Jesus knew their heart and knew their intent. And in verse 5 it says, and when he had looked around at them with what? What did it say he looked around at them with? He was angry. Made him angry. So anger is an emotion that God knows that we're going to have. I mean, Christ had it here. And what did it say about Christ when he lived on earth? This is an easy one to answer. What did it say about him? Did he sin or not? No sin found in him, no guile in his mouth. So nothing that Christ done while he was here was sinful or wrong in any way. So he looked around at them with anger. He felt anger toward them. And, it's a God-given feeling. It says that when he looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand," and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored, and it was whole again. Mark 10, verses 13 and 14 is the next one. There's three examples we'll look at here where Jesus was angry. Mark 10, verses 13 and 14. Starting in verse 13, it says, "And then he brought little children to him, that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked those who brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was greatly displeased and said to them, 'Let little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for such is the kingdom of God.'" And he goes on to say that whoever doesn't receive the kingdom of God as little children will by no means enter it. So it doesn't say he was angry here, but it says he was greatly displeased. The ESV uses the word indignant. That's somebody that's not happy. It's some level of anger or displeasure that Jesus felt in that. But Jesus didn't sin the whole time that he was here on earth, and he was angry. But one of the things I want you to notice about this is what he was angry about and what it says he was angry about. I don't see him being talked about being angry about things that's not sinful. That's what Jesus focused on. He focused on sin. He focused on living correctly. He focused on things of the world that could help make the world a better place in a way that he would help people learn how to live without sin. So his anger was directed more at his frustration of the fact that people were sinning and doing things that are wrong. But if you look back at the two experiences that I conveyed to you, there was an underlying thing happening there with both of these folks that I think they're having a struggle. And we'll get into this a little bit more as we start to talk about people's mentality and who we're dealing with as we deal with the general public anyway. And this can apply to people in your family if you have somebody that's continually difficult or somebody that you have to work with. That's a big one. But before we get into that, I want to ask you this. Do you realize the depth of the changes that your body goes through when you become angry? And I know we're talking about our response of how to deal with angry or how to deal with rude or aggressive people, but anger is an emotion that comes up a lot of times, like it did for me. It's an emotion that you're going to have. Do you realize what happens with the body when you have a moment that you get angry, that comes up, that hot flash that I felt? It's for a reason. Your brain activates differently. Your brain function changes, and there's some big words here. I'll skip them, but the part of your brain that processes emotions, including fear and anger, sends a distress signal to another part of your brain, and that part of your brain that acts like a command center that communicates with the rest of your body through your nervous system goes into effect, and it causes some hormonal changes. I'm going to make y'all answer this one. What's released when something like that happens? What kind of chemical in your body? Adrenaline. Y'all know that. The adrenal gland releases a shot of adrenaline, and when it releases that adrenaline, your hormones heighten the alertness and increases your energy because your body's getting ready for whatever is about to come. There's physical reactions. Your heart rate, your blood pressure increases. More blood is pumped to muscles and vital organs, and less is pumped to your brain. So that's a problem whenever you're trying to think rationally. So less blood goes to your brain when that happens. Your muscles tense up and it prepares for action, and sometimes it can cause trembling. Did you ever notice when you get angry, sometimes you sweat? Never really know why that is, but it's your body's reaction to try to cool you, to try to not let you overheat when you're trying to do that. Your pupils dilate, improves your vision, your digestive system slows down, and it does that because it's diverting energy to your muscles and the rest of your body. When you become angry, no matter what you're angry about, your body does this. It changes and does this. So Jesus living here in a physical form had to have experienced some of these physical changes just like we all do. And whenever your body experiences these changes, we have a word for that your body is preparing you for what? The 2 F's. Fight or flight. So that's what I picked, and when I left the store, I thought it's time to go. If he gets up out of the chair, it's going to go bad in a hurry. So I know you're trying to finish, but go ahead. It's fine. I can cut off if I need to.
I saw a video video just this week, and it was talking about when you really get worked up and your heart rate is going crazy, which happens when you get really angry. You can't always stop and do this, but something that they were saying is, in this video, the person put their face in ice water, and they kept it there for like 30 seconds, and they monitored their heart during that time, and it just slowed their heart down, and it just brought them back down. And it was illustrating the physical effects and how that calms you. But the accompanying video said that when you get upset like that, and I've tried this and it's really helped me, when you really get upset, don't raise your voice, just keep it soft. And they said when you do that, it does a couple of things. It stops your body from getting as excited, because when you start yelling, it pumps everything up. But it also stops the other person, because when you talk slow and calm, they have a tendency not to yell at you. They said to breathe slow and deeply and to speak very calmly, and in a sense you trick your body into thinking that it's not hyped up. And I thought that's very interesting, and I've tried it, and it really does make a difference to not let yourself just spike like that.
It's interesting because the first story I told, that was my demeanor, and that's how it went. The second story, I couldn't speak because he was talking over me, another one of my pet peeves. We all deserve the common respect to be able to say what we're trying to say, and he wasn't going to allow it. And I had to yell over him to say what I had to say before I left the building, which I felt it worse. I had to be outside at that point. So it's very interesting. And I know discussing these things, we're talking about some stuff that's not, this part of it is not deep biblical study when we're talking about how your body changes and all that stuff. I'm a very practical person, and I like to understand things. And to me, it starts to make a lot more sense why I felt the way I did when I got upset and whenever I get upset. Yeah. Yeah.
This is something I had in my notes about anger. It's Proverbs 16:32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who, listen to this part, he who rules his spirit is better than he that can take a city. And when we talk about ruling your spirit, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Controlling that anger, whatever you got to do, whether it be controlling those physical changes, not letting yourself get hyped up, but you're going to take control of this. And the Lord's comparing this to, at least when we were growing up, a strong man's a guy that would yell and punch a wall and do that kind of stuff. But he's comparing this to a mighty man, and he says the man who can control his spirit, he's way more mighty than that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that says a lot. It takes a lot to pull yourself back and control that kind of situation and not get drug into it. And yeah, I agree with that completely. So we're going to go to Ephesians chapter 4 and spend a little bit of time there. And as we're turning over there, I want to say sometimes turning the other cheek is not just, we'll go through this and we'll look at it. It's not necessarily just humping up and taking it either, is the words I put down here. To go along with what Don said about how you control yourself, I don't mean that your response back or your retaliation to that kind of approach needs to be aggressive. You shouldn't match the aggressive behavior that they're saying to you, but you don't always have to just stand there and take it either. And we'll get to Luke 6 and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So Ephesians chapter 4. 17 through 32 is what I was looking at. I scrolled down too far. So Ephesians chapter 4, verses 17 through 32. And so we probably won't read all that. I'll summarize some of it for the sake of time. So starting out in 17, it says, "This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind." So he's saying here, Paul is talking to the Gentiles, and he said, you should no longer walk in the futility of the Gentiles like they do, but he said no longer walk. So he means that the ones he's talking to were this way some. So what he's going to tell them, there's changes they need to make and they need to have made and they need to continue making. And he mentions the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that's in them, because of the blindness in their heart. I really wanted to get to that part because to me that's very telling of sometimes the people we deal with that are either rude or they're angry or they're aggressive and they're hard to deal with. I hope in that instance that it's not a Christian that's acting that way, but most of the time they're not Christians. And when it talks about here about having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, and the futility of their mind that it mentions, the futility is a word that means empty, and you think, yeah, they're empty-headed. That's not really what it means. It means that their mind is empty or void of God's teaching. It's empty of thinking of God's laws and the precepts that we live by. They don't have that there. So the only measurable they have is whatever kind of restraint they want to show for themselves. And it results in empty lives and no reward like what we hope that we have to look forward to. And that's the mindset of a lot of people that we have to deal with. And it says, understanding being darkened, they have a self-imposed spiritual blindness. There's nobody any more blind than somebody that just don't want to see something. And in that moment, they really don't care about rational thinking. Goes on in verse 20, and he mentions in verse 20, he says, but you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you've heard him and have been taught by him as the truth in Jesus. And he goes on to put off your former conduct. What that means is you haven't learned this from Christ, this kind of behavior and this kind of action and how you're acting. You haven't learned this from Christ if you've heard him teach. And if we've seen his words, it's not going to condone that kind of behavior of us giving that same kind of behavior back to people that are being aggressive or rude to us. Verse 26, jump down to verse 26 there where it says, well, let me start out in 25. He says, therefore, he switches gears a little bit. When he says therefore, that means because of everything I've just told you, because of this, because of what I've just said, then here's something to put with it. He says, put away lying. You know, God hates lying, so put away lying, obviously. But then he says, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor. Well, who's your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? Whoever you're around. It's anybody. So your neighbor, in almost every context, is whoever's in need. We learned that through the parable of the Good Samaritan. In this particular instance, he said, speak the truth with your neighbor, for we are members one to another. So he's making reference specifically to fellow Christians. But your neighbor is anybody. But specifically, he says, hey, I'm talking to you in this instance about your neighbor, for we are members one of another. He says, be angry and do not sin, and don't let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. And then he goes on to talk about other things that we should not do, like stealing and different things. But he says, be angry and sin not. So is God telling us that he wants us to be angry? Is he saying, okay, you can be angry, just go be angry, it's okay? It's not what he's saying, is it? He says, what he's saying is that he knows that you're going to wind up angry. He knows you're going to be angry. But he says, sin not and don't give place to the devil. We're going to talk about that a little bit more whenever we're going to jump over to another verse here in a little bit. But giving place to the devil, he talks here, he goes right past that and he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Now, when I was a kid, when I was younger, I knew about this verse and I would read it and I would think if anybody was mad before the sun sets, you've got to make that right, however you need to do it. And then you got less time in the winter to do that. You can be mad longer in the summer. It stays daylight longer. So, I didn't know. But when you really get to that, what's that really meaning whenever he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath? Somebody back here? Like I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't clear it up with him. I didn't know his number and didn't much want to at the moment, to be honest. And I was still trying to work through it. What that is saying, that's a way of saying it's got to have parameters. It's got to have a time limit. You can't let it fester. You can't let it sit there. You can't let it eat at you. It crept back in my head some over the weekend. It bothered me. I prayed about it a lot more. It's you got to have a time limit. Put parentheses around it. This has got to stop by this date. It's okay to be angry, but there's a time for everything. So you can be angry about it because if you don't put a time limit on it, and that's why he says don't give place to the devil, if you keep letting it linger, that anger will eventually turn into something different. It can be vindictive. It can be you want to pay them back. It'll make you want to drive back to the place it went on, or you make you want to pick the phone up again. That's when you start to get in trouble, and that's where you give place to the devil. There's some more verses about anger. Matthew 5:22 says, "But I say to you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment." Anger with his brother without cause. What's the opposite side of that? Can you be angry with your brother? Looks like to me you can, but it's got to have a cause. But that motivation of that anger, anger motivating you sometimes can be a good thing, that it can motivate you to think things through and cause changes, and it can make you change things in your own life sometimes. But if you're angry with your brother and it's without cause, you're in danger of the judgment. But if you have cause, then, if you use it positively and if you don't let it fester, then you can get that fixed. And it tells us how to go fix that. If we have aught against our brother, before you go to offering, it talks about that in Matthew as well. Luke 14:21, "So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, 'Go in quickly into the streets and lanes and the cities and bring here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind.'" That's a clear example of how the Lord will be with us if we don't respond to His call. Eventually, we're not going to have heaven. He made a change because He was angry and He called other people in. It was a positive change for those people. We're required to hate evil and love what is good. And if you hate something, it has to make you angry to some extent, to some little bit of a level. If you have a hate or a dislike or a strong dislike for something like that. Proverbs 8:13, "Fear the Lord. To fear the Lord is to hate evil, pride, and arrogancy, and the evil way and the forward mouth do I hate." Hard to be around people with a forward mouth of, bragging, arrogancy, an evil way, somebody that's overly pride. Hard to be around those people, and you can hate that, but you don't need to hate the person. Amos 5:15, "Hate the evil, love the good, establish judgment in the gate. It may be the Lord God of hosts, gracious son of the remnant of Joseph." Romans 12:9, "Let love be without hypocrisy, abhor that which is evil." I mean, you get the point. It's okay to be angry. It's an emotion that God expects us to have. The difference with this type of anger is it's backed with God's truth. It gives you direction, and that's part of the thing that this study that we're trying to do here, I'm trying to get across the point that you need to study this. You need to think about it. It's been a while since I studied about it, and it caused me to go back and study. If you've got that on the front of your mind and you've got it in your mind, you can be angry, but then you'll draw on that more easily.
This phrase for wrath, be angry, and sin not. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Kind of goes back to the story that you told when you were at the dealership and you were so angry. It wasn't wrong that it made you angry. In fact, being mistreated does make us angry. But the word that's translated wrath here carries with it the idea of rage.
Yeah, it's different.
Wrath is next level.
You can be angry, you can even feel that rage, but when He says, "Don't let the sun go down on your rage," you can't let that rage stay. You've got to let that calm down and let that subside, which is what you said you've done. Because imagine if you don't, what that turns into. If you let that rage, it turns into hatred and sin, and you give place to the devil, because as that rage stirs up in you, it's going to take you bad places.
I told Hunter about it on Friday night whenever they got down there. I told Hunter about it on Friday night when we got down there, and he listened to the story quietly. And then after I was done with the story, he said, "I'm thankful you went to the truck." And I said, "Yeah, me too." And he said, "People read the headline, they don't listen for the story." And I thought about that. And I thought, if an altercation had happened there, how bad would that have looked on me, because I wouldn't have had the opportunity to tell the story to most people. I would have probably had to stand before you guys and say, "Hey, this is what's happened." And I don't have to do that because it didn't happen. But interesting. Monty?
I was going to quote Psalms 37 and 8. It says exactly what Don was saying. If you don't get rid of that evil, it's going to eat you up. And the reason why I say it's Psalms 37 and 8 is because in that particular chapter in the Psalms, Saul was chasing after David to kill him. And he didn't turn around and kill him when he had many opportunities to do so. Yeah.
James 1:19. "So then, my beloved brethren," this is an important section of Scripture, we'll get that in. "My beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear and slow to speak and slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." God can have wrath, and God can be angry, and God can be angry for a while till He does what He's going to do about it, and He can control it. Well, us not so much. Our wrath is not going to produce the righteousness of God. It doesn't say that wrath is a sin, like Don was just saying, but anger or wrath, you got to keep parameters around it. Moses was an example of it when he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, where anger got the best of him. And then whenever we're looking at Luke 6 and 27 and 36, like we were studying in Josh's class, another thing that I wanted to, and maybe I've got to be quick. I don't want to leave this one hanging. Let's jump over there real quick. Luke 6, 27 and 36. And what I'm going to say may throw you a little bit, but stay with me. Do we have to take these verses we're about to read literally? And I want you to think about that. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away from your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks. Give to everyone who asks of you. And from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, do also likewise to them. So here's what I'm trying to say. 2 minutes and I've got to hurry. If we're going to take that literally, I've heard people say you have to take that literally because turning the cheek. They always say that, but I've never heard anybody tell me that you've got to go empty your bank account and give it to somebody. Or you've got to give them your car, or you've got to do all that. So here's what I'm trying to say about do you take this literally? And we can study about this a lot more. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I think what Christ is trying to teach here is a mindset, and that's what we're talking about this morning. He's trying to teach a mindset. If somebody comes up, now in the Jewish culture and in that culture in those days, if you get slapped, that's a show of ultimate disrespect. That's why they talk about slapping. That's why he uses it here. Being slapped, whether it's intended to hurt you or not, is such disrespect. And he's saying, let them do it twice if you have to. That don't literally mean that you've got to let somebody slap on you. And I don't believe it literally means that you've got to give them your car, or you've got to, yes, we have to help people. We've got to, another verse here that we hear people use, for sake of time, I'll just paraphrase it. It's where it says, let him that works, he that works shall not eat. They had that problem. So how do you reconcile those verses if this is a literal interpretation? If you've got somebody that won't work, God says, don't let them eat. The teaching is don't let them eat. They have to get up and go to work. If you said literal interpretation that you have to give anybody anything they ask of you, then you have to give this guy that ain't willing to work something to eat. And that's not what it says. You've got to use good judgment when you're ciphering through the scriptures. You've got to look at this. And I believe that what Christ is teaching here is the mindset. You've got to have a giving, tender heart. And then you've got to have Christ's teaching in your mind and have it at the ready. So when you have these kind of interactions, that you can deal with it in a proper way, and that you don't embarrass yourself, or you don't sin, or you're not displeasing to God. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? I think it's a mindset that he's trying to teach here. So what are your thoughts about that?
One more comment. In Ephesians 4:26, he says, be angry and sin not, let not the sun go down on your wrath. The parallel is Psalm 4 and verse 4. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart in your bed and be still. So he says, the parallel says, go to bed and lay there and think about this and calm yourself down.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting to put those two together.
It is. Somebody else back here?
I kind of think about this as well in reference to Luke chapter 6, where he says to turn the other cheek and things of that nature. It's an implying there's a lack of power there. It is the idea that you do not have the ability to make me act in a way that is ungodly.
True. And that's, the very last comment that I had to put was that the only actions you can control in any situation is your actions. Like, I tried to respond the same to both of these guys. I got the result that you would hope for with the first one, the second one not so much. And that's probably just what it is at this point.
I would say this, don't quit coming to Bible study, because most of Jesus' confrontations was in the synagogue, and he knew it was going to happen, and he went there religiously.
Yeah. I mean, you can't get away from it. And it seems like it's so much more prevalent. People are so much more entitled than it seems like they used to be, and patience is a little thinner, and it seems different than what it was. So you're gonna have this. But again, as far as my comment about the literal interpretation of this, I think it's a very, very good section of verses. But I think you've got to really look at it from a reasonable standpoint. You've got to look at it like he's trying to create a mindset, a way that we're supposed to live. We're supposed to be different and not respond to people and give them back the hateful, mean demeanor that they're giving us. And it's got to look different.
God
says, vengeance is mine. God's going to take care of the people that mistreat us. That's not really ours to do. So thank you for your comments, and you're dismissed.